Okay, folks, we get a start now that we've got our speakers here for a very warm welcome to the first of our 2026 seminars. We've actually got seminars plotted out for the whole semester and actually beyond into the second half of the year too. My name is Mark Boyle, along with my colleague, Senior Research Fellow Seán Foghlú, and John O'Connor, and also Linda Conley, who's Director of the Museum. We welcome you to this latest in the Research for Policy seminar series. We'll kind of change roles today. Seán normally chairs and I think Seán thought he wanted a wee go. He wanted a wee shot at asking questions at the end. So I thought I will give him a shot, give him a chance. Possibly he's also testing me, so he's put me up to chair it. So let's see how this goes today. We haven't had a local government really research for policy seminar so far. There's a lot of seminars we've had that touch on local government issues or regional local development, but not specifically local government. Perhaps that reflects the centralisation of the Irish state. But we know the importance of the local and national politics, and also the vibrant regional local planning and economic development traditions which Ireland has. So it's a bit of a lacunae that we wanted to try to resolve today, and we're delighted we've got a couple of speakers who haven't worked necessarily directly together, or they're working very closely in the same kind of space. Bernie O'Donoghue Hynes, Dr. Bernie O'Donoghue Hynes, who is Head of Research for the Local Government Management Agency, is going to speak about her experience of the intelligence needs, particularly the data needs. And data is going to be a big focus of today's seminar, from the kind of inside, working with local authorities directly. What do they need? What are they short of? How do they use data? What are the challenges? And I suppose, what are the opportunities for us looking into contribute and work with the LGMA and others to produce the intelligence required for good local policy making? And then we'll go, secondly, to our own one and only Justin Gleeson. Justin has built up, as you will know, the All Ireland Research Observatory, one of the most incredible, formidable university offerings to the regional and local government and also national government on data intelligence and big data and geocomputation, GI science, and so on. So we'll learn a little bit Justin's work, particularly as it pertains to regional and local government from a university perspective. And as usual, we'll have a couple of presentations, we'll have a little break, we'll have a little discussion amongst ourselves, and then we'll open it to the floor. If you are online, please type your question in. Seán will ask the question later, so we're not going to field any questions online, but we'll take those questions and we'll ask them to the panel. But people in the room, feel free to ask a question as it goes. And the final thing I want to say by way of context is in Ireland, we have quite a different research for policy network in comparison to some jurisdictions. I mean, Britain's a very centralised state as well, but even in the UK, there's a different architecture, there's a different scale-craft of research for policy. And the university as an anchor institution embedded in its local hinterland, and looking at the social purpose and social value of the university, particularly the research in the university in a local setting as an anchor institution, is one of the big themes in the UK landscape of research for policy. We don't really have that here. Most of our universities speak to national policy, and I know here in Maynooth we are turning increasingly to Kildare and Meath County Councils, trying to build up specific relationships there. So I'm going to be curious to reflect, I suppose, upon the scope and opportunities for us to maybe embolden and strengthen the role of anchor institutions and the university in its local hinterland, not least in regard to data provision, data interpretation. So we'll see if there's any scope to probe that and reflect on that a little bit more. So we're going to start with Bernie to kick off with. Bernie, over to you yourself.
Okay, okay, first I suppose just basics around local government. As Mark was saying, very different to the policy, I suppose, environment of the various government departments and so on. So obviously, as everybody's aware, there's 31 local authorities. But these local authorities deliver 1,100 different services. Now, 600 are common to all local authorities, but then there are services that are unique to each to specific local authorities. And that's about the local response to local need. So each local authority needs to be able to respond differently to different challenges and different issues and so on. Now, they're the general themes. If you go onto localgov.ie, they're the general themes. You drill down, it goes down through various services. And then in terms of funding, local government is funded by 29 different government departments and agencies via at least 500 different grants. So it's quite a fragmented picture. It's this kind of patchwork. Now, Department of Housing would be the primary funder, but because we deliver across almost every single policy area, there's funding coming down around everything. And in Ireland, there doesn't tend to be an awful lot of mainstream guaranteed funding. It tends to be program after program after program. So just even in terms of administration and control, there's a lot of control over if funding is coming down in drip feeds and so on. And it also means that every time there's a new election, there's an awful lot of scope for things to be changed and to respond to different kind of policy outlooks. Now, the local government management agency, most people don't know who we are. So we're a state agency and we're established to provide support and advice to local authorities on a range of projects and issues. Now, we have the council and the board. Now, that's 31 chief executives of the local authorities. And the board itself is 8 of those chief executives plus 3 nominees of the minister. But the critical thing is that our funding comes directly from the local authorities. We do get funding from the Department of Housing as well, but it's to fund very specific projects. So we are funded by and work for the local authorities. That's completely and utterly our brief. Like I say, we engage with the Department of Housing, but it's via the chief executives. So in terms of how the local authorities engage with the various policy areas and government departments and so on, we work for what's called the CCMA, the County and City Management Association. And this is the 31 chief execs and 5 assistant chief execs in Dublin City. So they form the CCMA. And that CCMA committee meets every single month. And it has 8 policy committees. So these policy committees reflect the key policy concerns that local government is engaging with across the various government departments. So obviously, like something like planning, we'd be engaging obviously with housing and planning, same with housing, transport infrastructure and climate, our circular economy and so on. It's normally, well, it was DEC and then it was DC, I can't remember what it is now. Rural community would be rural, Department of Rural and so on. So different departments would impact on different policy areas. But like these policy committees engage on an ongoing basis because they meet every month as well. Now, just say something like the Housing Committee. The Housing Committee has 90 working groups working to respond to different policy pieces that are coming into it at any time. So there's massive policy engagement via these policy committees. So just say, in terms of the policy piece and what we do then, our objective is, okay, so we engage directly with policymakers, okay? Now, definitely there's increased engagement centrally with the CCMA/LGMA. Previously, to say, particularly while there was the embargo in public service, you had, I suppose, a traditional kind of public servant, traditional local authority, and it was a very hierarchical relationship. And there was engagement from the various departments in terms of engaging with 31 local authorities separately and issuing circulars and so on. But increasingly, the government departments are engaging more centrally with the CCMA and the LGMA. And that's because, I suppose, we're moving towards more unified service delivery, you know, a unified response to issues and a more unified and two-directional way around engaging with policy. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit as well, that was everybody had to mobilise instantly. And instantly, the state really needed to engage centrally with local government to respond. So there was no scope for them to engage with 31 local authorities. So all this engagement happens through national membership of national task force, working groups, oversight groups, like numerous presentations to JOCs, constantly into JOCs, but then we get requests for submissions, then we get very specific data and research requests into us as well. And then there's the informal and formal exchanges. So a lot of those committees would have regular presentations in from government departments and the same way backwards. Now, the piece that personally I was interested in when I got involved in local government is this, the street level bureaucrat. So it's really the policy implementation piece. So this is about, okay, like what my PhD was looking at the design of early years education and care policy using policy design theory. And it was because we have this amazing policy. We know the child development stuff in Ireland, Shield and Asher are amazing, but you know, why does it fall down when we get to the implementation piece? What's happening there? And a lot of it is about these street level bureaucrats who get to interpret the policy and redefine it. A program comes down, they define access, you define who gets in and so on. But that's rampant across local government. They issue circulars, new programs are developed. A lot of these directors of service are very powerful and they don't realize it because they're interpreting things and implementing them. So from the LGMA's perspective and that piece of engagement, it's kind of up and down piece. So there are now a lot of national offices in the LGMA. We have one around waste, we have one around water, we have the Housing Delivery Coordination Office, and there's new centralised office being set up now and increasing within the LGMA. And that allows us a lot of scope to engage very directly with policymakers. Then there's programme implementation that people are involved in, legislation implementation. So the new planning act, that we have quarterly meetings of all directors of housing, all directors of planning and so on. The department are in making presentations to directors of planning, in particular around planning legislation, and getting live feedback from the directors around this will work, that won't work, you know, that's a challenge and so on and so on. So there's a lot of to and froing. And then local responses and local networking. And in terms of evidence audiences, so at this top piece here, the CCMA going in to government departments, are engaging very, very, on a daily basis with very senior officials. So you're dealing with SecGens, assistant secs and so on, and POs is a regular daily thing. But there's also the politicians. So like there is engagement with them. It's not as much as the officials, but the officials are trying to shape things to go on to politicians and so on. Now at this level, it's really about us trying to get the evidence to the staff so that they're briefed and they understand when they're doing the engagement with officials themselves, and then the elected members. So in the LGMA, we would very rarely deal with the elected members unless we specifically go out to consult with them. But it's the LGMA staff, the directors of service are the ones dealing with the elected members at all times. And then service users. And now, as part of our research agenda, we put a lot of time into consulting with the public, particularly around how they engage with services for local authorities. So I'm just going to fly through these. This is just an indication I took from the 2024 annual report, and it's each of the committees, and it lists the government departments, the agencies and other organisations that they deal with on an annual basis. So this is the rural community and tourism. So you can see there all the government departments, all the state agencies in a given year. This is housing. You can see it's a vast number of government departments and agencies. This is the transport infrastructure and networks, so a massive amount there. The environment, climate, circular economy. So like within the department stuff, it'll be key departments you'll see on top, but there's a massive amount. There's the economic development one, the finance one, like, I mean, everything there. You have Táilte Éireann, you have NOC, you have MABS, you have the PwC, and then corporate. So even corporate, which is about IT, customer service and so on. But you can see there a massive amount of engagement, even like Uders and Agates, because like providing service in the Irish language, it's just so varied. It's just so varied. So it just gives you a sense of how much engagement is going on at a policy level across multiple areas. It's a really complex policy environment. Now, centrally, we have this research unit, and there's 4 of us. Emily and Sarah are here with me today. And poor Sarah joined in December and Emily joined in January, so they're really new to see. So 3 of us are here today, but we did secure funding when I started in the LGMA back in 2018, submitted a business case to bring in and set up a central data unit, because ultimately my experience of engagement with policy was really telling me, because local government is really complicated because we're involved in policy making, but we also deliver services. So we're in the tent, but we're also direct service delivery. So it's a really complicated space. So my experience was absolutely telling me that the way forward was about data. It's so really focusing especially on administrative data, existing administrative data, and not these once-off collections. And because when I went into the LGMA, we could not answer basic questions about how many, because you had 31 local authorities all doing their own thing and encouraged to do their own thing at the time, because the main focus was to respond to local need. But that's kind of changing. So we needed to develop a national view, a sectoral view, and that really has started to happen. But like I say, built on the power, the neutrality of data and evidence. Because before I came to local government, and that's nearly 26 years ago, I had been in the community and voluntary and the not-profit. And the advocacy voice just gets shut down once you go into policy. So how do you get the evidence in there, but switch off the advocacy voice? And it was through data. It's neutral, but very powerful and very difficult to kind of counter. And watching the conference there that you had earlier in the year, the Danish speaker really talked about that, like how are the economists all getting in the door? And it is the neutrality of what they're saying and the assertiveness of data. So the data thing really, really works, now, based on my experience. So we have a model now where each of the CCMA policy committees, well, not all of them yet, but 5 of them, we set up what's called a data working group and work with them to see what are the key policy issues we're working at the moment, what administrative data do we have, and let's start gathering it centrally and see can we answer some questions. So we've established one for housing, and under that, like we're working with the homeless data, because the homeless data in Ireland is the best data across the OECD. It's absolutely incredible stuff. Dublin have been really assertive at analysing their data. Well, we now have the national picture, and there's a very distinctly different picture between inside Dublin and outside Dublin. We also look at right sizing and visualising tenancy and housing information and so on. So like I could do a session on each of these individually, but I'll just touch on the key areas, because really I'm just talking about the process today. We've run around planning, and even when we established the planning data work group, we engaged with Rob and Carla here to do a whole mapping piece about just mapping the data around planning, just to stop and just take stock of, okay, what's currently happening, which has ended up being an amazing piece, because Rob has been able to update this diagram flow, and as things are changing, because they are changing rapidly, just to actually visually see that. And it's been a very powerful tool for us, because centrally we're looking at developing a brand new national planning system. So it's been really good to be able to just visualize in a simple way how planning works and the impact of every change and how you see that. And to say back to our housing data, that's one of the really good things, is we have been able to show the impact of certain policy decisions through the data. Then climate, so we track climate action indicators for local government, and we do that every year, gather data and publish that. And we've been able to kind of change how local authorities are managing the response to emergency weather and so on, just through tracking stuff and showing that there isn't a consistent response. We're currently working with libraries as well around their data, and corporate. So we do huge work on customer engagement, how customers engage with local authorities, and bringing that evidence back up to the chief execs to try and get services geared towards the needs of the customer and so on. An area that when I entered local government, I never thought I'd be in, because you don't think of social policy and customer engagement, but it's really important because it's so different in a public service environment than a commercial environment. It's a fascinating area. So for us, the data working group process is critical, okay? So members of the CCMA Policy Committee, they select who's going to chair it from their group, and then that person selects the members. They agree on the policy questions, we agree on the data that's out there to address the question, and then we have the central data unit now that gather the data and visualise it. But the members of the data working group, who are directors of service out across the local authorities, are the ones interpreting the data with us. And we're encouraging them to be the ones to be the owners and to be the disseminators of that data. Because ultimately it's about deciding who gets to see this data, because that is a big question. When you're visualizing some data, particularly around homelessness, that can be very, very sensitive. It's like there can be questions about, do you want to visualize this? Because once you do, there's going to be questions about it. So it's working with it to decide who's going to see it, when they're going to see it, and what format we're going to bring it out in. Because generating the evidence is only the start. It's where does it go? How do you get it in front of the people you need to get in front of at the right time? Now, the benefits to us of this co-creation of evidence with our local authority staff is around this ownership plus their expertise. They are the street level bureaucrats. They are the interpreters of policy. They know what this data means. And it's about them translating it into language that their co-workers and the people that work for them and the officials will understand. They're advocates for use of the outputs across the sector. And it's to make sure that when they are engaging with officials, and we have no sight of it, we don't know anything about it because it's what they do on a daily basis, that they have this information with them. So we're disseminating it out. We never know where it's going to end up because you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that you're trying to get information to. And the other, so that's the down ways. The other thing is that these CCMA data working groups report into their CCMA committees, which in turn report into the CCMA, full CCMA. So it is about that accountability piece then. We're never doing anything unless the full CCMA know about it. So the CCMA know about every single dashboard we do. So we have 10 active dashboards up and running at the moment. And we're up and running probably about 3 years with data. And there's a huge trust of the outputs across the chief executives now. And there's a lot of credibility about the LGMA staff that are working in this area and working with the data working groups. And there's a lot of integrity now around this data. It's seen as very it's non-biased, it's factual, and it's not hidden from anybody. We develop the national picture, but every local authority gets their own local version of that data. So and we can answer nationally, they can answer locally. And just the kind of outputs then we're looking at is we have dashboards, but the ones, we also produce reports and papers and do events. Now, with reports, we were doing the big reports, the methodology, blah, blah, blah. Nobody reads them. They're gone. That day is over. Like nobody reads them. So we've gone infographic style, and then you have to do your social media campaigns and so on, because you have so many audiences that you're trying to get your information out to. But what tends to land best is tailored presentations. So we were recently in the Cabinet Subcommittee on Housing with the homeless data. We've presented senior officials groups. So that's all the Secretary Generals and Assistant Secs and so on. Then the National Housing Action Committee. So that brings in the NGO stakeholders as well. But again, just say with our corporate customer service, that's the only piece of research that gets into every single policy committee. So all 8 policy committees listen to what the customer is saying back to them. But we also present that stuff to the elected members as well, because everybody has a vested interest in understanding how we work best with our customer. But we have stakeholder webinars, we staff webinars, we do plenary sessions, we attend the Director of Housing Forums, the customer service workshops with NOAC, that's the National Oversight and Audit Commission. And we work with them very, very tightly because they are the auditors and the overseers of how local government work. And we're really working with them to use evidence to try and assess and monitor how local authorities are working. And then deeper as well, they have a whole customer service. So these are the ones that tend to land best, but they're very resource intensive, because when you have a staff of 4, and until recently there was only 2 of us who could go out and do presentations, but there's now 3 of us. That demands a lot of attention, because when you're showing somebody and talking it through, you'll get their attention. It's difficult if you're a policymaker to get the time to actually read even infographics or social media or anything. Now we're moving to data stories. That's where we're moving next year. And really that's about the local authority staff getting stuff that's really engaging for them, easy to read, and modifying. So there'll be, if we do a data story about one thing nationally, we'll have 31 versions of it, so they can understand locally what their data looks like. So this is just a quick run through. Sorry, I'm putting way over time as is, but this is just a quick run through around one particular policy area, and it's just based on my personal experience. So way back when in 2001, there was this housing agency, and that happened to be a group of people that I didn't know at the time, and Daithí Downey, Nat O'Connor, Colin Morgan, all PhD guys who understood through looking at evidence how you could actually address homelessness. So they developed this pathway to home. So really it's about getting people into housing, and then you fix them. You don't fix them in emergency accommodation and then get them into homes. So a really powerful evidence piece, but they were an external agency. Now that they got subsumed into local government back in 2010, And thus that Dublin Regional Homeless Executive was born. But it brought these staff in and they became local authority staff. So they weren't your typical local authority staff member who'd come up through the public service. They were a lot of kind of really, innovative evidence users and evidence generators. So then we move into the DRT and they developed this amazing IT system, PASS. And it was developed for a pittance. It costs hardly anything, but it's really unique because not only does it gather the local authority data, if you're what's called a Section 10 funded organisation, so that's the NGO, so that's it's Simon Focus, every single one of them. If you receive funding, you have to use PASS, which means the data around the service user is held in one place. And now action case notes and all that kind of stuff is anonymous and you can't see it centrally, but we can keep the stats. So we have this dynamic use of data. Now, I joined in 2012 in the DRT at the time, and we worked very closely with the Department of Housing at the time, because all the media, everything was, nobody knows how many homeless people are in Ireland. And there was this once a year counted in, and it was, you're lying, it's not that. So we worked with the department to publish data and help the officials shift the focus from how many to what can we do about it, how do you address it? And it was only by publishing the data that conversation started to happen. And this is when, of course, I kind of fell in love with data, where you realize, okay, this is the only thing we were getting the door with. We were trying to get in with other stuff and we weren't getting in the door. So then, just say 2017, the housing crisis really starts to kick in. But there was a minister for housing at the time who actually understood evidence and listened to it. And we were saying, stop opening hostels that don't have support. Unless there's support, you can't actually move people on. And we were able to get the funding down to open only emergency accommodations. And the pity about it was that, just say 2014, 2012, the Pathway to Home model was working and hostels were being shut down because they were moving on people at a faster rate than they had been before the model had been implemented. But then the housing crisis kicks in. And then Housing First gets funded. And that was a big surprise because that was like quite an intensive amount of funding. But we'd done a cluster analysis that was able to show that 10% of that homeless population was consuming 50% of the resources. So just if you invest in that cohort, you reduce the expenses quite dramatically. Once again, it was the data that told the story. And then I'm out of the picture for a while and I'm in the LGMA, and the DRT have continued to develop really, really amazing data. But we started visualizing the data then nationally. So we get the homeless data in now in the LGMA, and we're able to do very detailed profiling of the subpopulations and to illustrate the impact of varied policy pieces. So because we'd been working with officials in the Department of Housing that I had worked with previously when I was in the DRG, when they'd been at a different level and they were back in, and they were very au fait with the homeless piece and understood the data. And there were also, I suppose, there's a crew of people in the department and various government departments now from outside, and it brings in a little bit of different thinking as well. So there was an appetite then for using the data. So they asked us to come in then to the National Homeless Action Committee first, and that was chaired by the Minister for Housing. He asked us then to come into the senior officials group and into the Cabinet subcommittee. And ultimately, from a data journey, that's really where you need to end up. So you can just see that kind of journey, that scope just around this particular policy issue. So I suppose I leave it there.
Thank you, Ben. We're just going to go straight in to Justin, if that's okay. Thank you very brilliant, really good. Thank you. Justin, over about 20 minutes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Great to be in here speaking. Based on this floor myself, so it's great to be here and see some colleagues here, particularly from the research office. I land so much stuff in your desk over the years, you're wondering what the hell in God's name are they doing over here. So it's nice to be able to show you some examples of what we actually do. So Bernie, thanks so much for your talk there. So interesting and so much going on across the country and so much has changed in the last number of years. And I think what I'm going to talk about here will absolutely complement Bernie's presentation there, but talk a little bit more about how we work really at the more local level with data and how that feeds into policy development. So going to give a little background to AIRO, what we do, and kind of the journey where we've come from as I kind of made my way into this institution many years ago, and evolved with skills and knowledge and data and technology to the sort of work that we do now, and how that I feel has a good impact on policy at a local level. So key things we're going to talk about is our work with data and policy, and talk about the kind of this methodology we've come up with, the data we work with, then show some examples of the type of products and services that we produce. And as Bernie said there, one of the most important things, and I believe it now firmly, is you can have as much data as you want and documents and reports. The most important thing of getting the message across and is this data storytelling piece, getting in the room and talking about a place. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I feel that for me is the most important delivery mechanism of all of this sort of work. Then I give, like Bernie did there, some kind of concrete example of data and policy in action at the local authority level. And the key thing for me, certainly the last number of years, is the development of local economic and community plans, which are start with data and finish with data in terms of monitoring. So we'll go through all of that. So a little bit of a background, a story for me, where I came from, really. So, and this is really, you know, a start. I've been working in this sort of area with data and policy, local government for, I don't know, back in sort of when I started in college in Galway. Got involved in GIS data analytics. When at the start, I did this kind of research thesis on the impact of foreign direct investment in the Midwest, and like, look where we are now in the country and how major that is for our exchequer and everything. But that's when I got involved in GIS, and there was a guy in UCG at the time, was in Leeds University. So I said, yeah, listen, I'll give that a shot. I went over there and being from the west of Ireland, ended up doing a thesis on vehicle theft in West Yorkshire, which to me was like the most exciting thing ever, working with data from the Metropolitan Police, where they just literally handed over, wasn't even a USB, just gave me the data. I walked out of the building, you know. So how things have changed on that side. But it was that little bit of work. I did an interview with an engineering consultancy in Birmingham, and the guy who interviewed me, when I said, oh yeah, I did a thesis on vehicle theft, said, vehicle theft, you're in. Because some of the work they were doing, they were analysing data for local authorities in the West Midlands, and crime analysis, one of their things. So that kind of got me the job in the door on that. But that was almost my start of working with data entry, data analysis, and working with local authorities, and seeing how they use data for their day-to-day work, their tasks, and developing policies and so on. Kind of moved from there. Then Rob Kitchen, who's here, who I guess gave me my job when I moved back to Ireland in 2007 or 2006-7, just as the economy was about to crash. Moved back. Rob interviewed me up in Dundalk all those years ago, and that was really the start of AIRO, which originally was this regional research observatory, this kind of cross-border group looking at data. It came down to Maynooth. I remember meeting Rona here on the first day, and we gradually got AIRO up and running. And Rob held my hand for many years until I was able to do it, and then just sort of pushed me away and said, off you go now, sort it out yourself from then on. So we've been kind of doing this since, you know, 2007 onwards. And this kind of, my journey through this is almost like the journey of, in some ways, Maynooth, with a lot of this policy work and engaging with local authorities. And we've been involved in every single local authority across the country, all the regional assemblies, right up to national planning framework and so on. So I've learned an awful lot in terms of data technology, and I've learned an awful lot from people in here in this building, and how to appreciate data and not just look at the numbers, but trying to think behind the data. What is it actually about, and what does it mean about the citizens in the country and the people and the places and all that sort of thing. Since then, I've actually lost all my hair and I've morphed down to here. But one thing, and it gets back to the data storytelling, this guy here back in 2001 butchered his brother's best man speech in public speaking. My mother still hasn't forgiven me. And now at this stage, in terms of talking in public and telling the story about places, I think that's such an important skill. And when you get into chambers to talk with local authorities, it is the key way of getting the message across. Tell them the importance of the data and what's happening in places. To me, that's vital. Background to AIRO, what we do. So most of our work is in the Irish planning system. So national level, we work with kind of National Planning Framework, Department of Housing and Planning. Key people we work with are the 3 regional assemblies. So Eastern and Midlands, Northern Western, Southern Regional Assembly. With people here from Office of Planning Regulator, work with the guys there. So we're involved in all this sort of work. But most of our work here is really at the local authority level, working with local authorities. And as Bernie mentioned, some of the stuff that's going on there, the amount of plans and policies coming out of Department of Housing, are coming out of housing sections, community sections, retail, it is endless. There's so much going on. And over the last number of years, it's all now to be evidence-based, data-driven. So there's an awful lot going on in this area. So I'm going to talk about some of that in a few minutes. And really, this sector is growing and growing across the country. We now have a spin-out company from Maynooth University people in place. There's 8 people kind of engaged and working in that at the moment. So that is growing. And that is a sign that there's so much going on in this space. Okay, an important piece here is how we do this. So when you work in an academic institution, methodologies and your work is important, right? So we've developed this thing, and this is really a summary of the type of work we do, and we call this our D3 plan methodology, right? It sounds good, and it's really what we do, but you have it in a nice graphic, so you can talk about your process and how we work with data and all these things. The first thing we do is this kind of policy review, and that's so important. So you need to understand whether it's a housing policy or whether it's a county development plan or LECP. You need to know exactly why this thing is in place and what local authorities have to do. So understanding all of that. We do so much public stakeholder consultation with different groups. Our key stuff here is in our data collection. I'll come back to that. So we have this AIRO data hive where we basically hoover up all this stuff, right? And then we create these graphics, maps, charts, dashboards, all that sort of thing. So this stuff is really formalized now. It's quite quick to get through. We develop our analysis and insights. But this is the most important piece, this kind of knowledge transfer, the sharing of the data. So that's kind of our process, how we work through it. In terms of our data collection, so LGMA produced loads of great stuff and there's more and more coming out. So we basically have this massive hoover and we just suck everything in from all these agencies across the country. All right, this is all publicly funded data from all these different groups, spend a lot of time working on it. We basically put it all in. And what we do with that stuff is we set it up to talk to the geographies that people are interested at the local level. You have your strategic plan, your regional assemblies, strategic planning areas, your local authorities. But below that, if you're working at a local level, you're interested in towns, you're interested in villages where people live, you're interested in urban, rural, and you're interested in, at the political level, local electoral areas and municipal districts, because councillors want to have data to talk about their own constituents. They're interested in their county, they're interested in the state, but they're interested in the local, and their local is the area where many people will get elected from. So turning the data to that is one of the key stuff that we do here. And once you have that, you can start telling the stories. We use all sorts of data, our technology and software. This has changed so much over the years. I'm I guess a geographer in the background, not a computer scientist. We butchered our way through this over the years and we can now create these tools, but they're so easy to do now. The technology is it's fantastic and so easy to create these tools now without having to have computer science in the background. All these great software here that are in place. We design all the stuff in Illustrator, so the design element is important. And our buddy here, ChatGPT or Claude, or whoever, has transformed how we work, even as our small group. When I worked back in Birmingham and I started out in the engineering consulting, there was a guy there called Sherman Griffiths, and Sherman knew everything, right? If I had any problem, I could barely even turn on a PC at the time. I'd go over and ask Sherman, how do you do this? How do you do that? Sherman had the answer for everything. And he was almost like a mentor to him for years. I now have Sherman in my pocket at all times. And this guy knows way more than Sherman ever did. So what you can learn from this to feed into your work process is absolutely phenomenal, from tech stuff to report writing to analysis and interpretation. There's so much going on. So this whole area is transformed so much. Some of the type of things that we do. So that's all the background. So we produce these services, systems. So I'm going to run through some examples, show the variety of stuff that we do. So we've developed this with the GA, this data insights hub. So this is getting towards local level things, but it's about where our clubs, where is our culture, where are our facilities. So we take the data, turn it into these tools that they can look to see what's going on. We all heard of GA demographic report recently. It's central to planning in Ireland because it's telling us what's happening at local levels. We hear Ireland's all growth, 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 but it's not the case. All our rural communities here are changing rapidly and they're aging. They're declining in population. You can't feel the different teams together, but that has an impact on schools and so on. So a lot of this sort of data, looking at these sort of kind of cultural things. Bernie would have been involved in some of the stuff we did with Dahi and Dublin City, creating these housing tools, looking at house prices across the cities, looking at where people are in receipt of HAP payments. So all these sort of visual tools that are used for telling the story about places. Similar stuff we're doing at the moment with, you mentioned Údarás with Gaeltachta, doing lots of good stuff with them. This is again about culture, about language, and providing this data to a planning team in Údarás who their interest is in local areas about the Gaeltacht. How do you preserve the Gaeltacht for future generations? To do that, you need to sustain the population. You need to get jobs there. And if you have those things, you have a chance at retaining the Irish language and building it for future. So for them, data is really important. So loads of stuff. And all this data in the country now that's available, that the likes of Bernie's team put all that work in, all these different groups, you can just pull all this stuff down into these tools to go from little to having the most amazing resource to fully understand what's going on in areas. Do a lot of stuff on commuting flows. This is all the stuff we do with Kildare County Council, looking at where people work, where people, who works in different towns, their age profile, their industry, commuting levels in and out of the city. Again, it's describing the area. Lots of different things here. Would have worked on the just transition stuff in the Midlands. Again, it's all data that feeds in to telling a story, a report about something like that. We wrap all these things up in different reports, profiles. As Bernie said, no one's going to read 200 pages anymore. Well, there might be one person in the local authority who read it, but the rest of them won't, right? So you got to clean this up. You got to create visually engaging graphics, stuff that tells the story, bullet points, head things. That's what people get back to, right? Oh, so much of all of this stuff and our knowledge in many of these data sets is a great initiative now with the 3 regional assemblies and regional development monitor. This is an online tool that pulls in all of this data for these different sections at the top. So great tool here, similar to the stuff that LG made there, dashboards, lots and lots of different things on in here. So if you're a local authority, you want to know what's going on in house prices, a couple of clicks here, you can see, okay, well, what's going on in Kildare, and they can feed that in then to different policies to see what's going on. So really quick stuff, you don't have to go to the source to get it. Maps on, what is this? This is looking at water quality across the country, different things, river quality, all these sorts of stuff. We've got the National Census Atlas on here, hundreds of different variables about every sort of part of life in Ireland. And the ability of the new technology now, you can, local authorities can create their own individual county maps, something we would have been a distant dream, Rob, 15 years ago. Couldn't do that now, you can do all of this sort of stuff. But for me, as I said, the most important piece is getting in here on that laptop in that chamber. So you will have your directors of service and they're your chief executives and all your elected members, and how you tell the story to them about their place is the most important piece. As you'll have seen when Bernie presented their hand gestures and how you talk about data and the enormity of things and where the future is going and so on, it's so important to tell the story. I was watching Bernie there. She's an absolute expert at doing it, and how you engage people and talk about the data. And that's really important, that it's when you're in the room talking about this sort of data, you need to live and breathe the data. You need to really know what's going on in the local authority. Niall Cusson, the Office of Planning Regulator, been had so many sessions with him over the years, seeing him present. And one of the key things I always took from him was having some sort of local anecdote about the place where you're presenting in, and how a couple of small little things can immediately get you engaged with the audience, which you really want. And when we do our work, we will go to the local authorities, spend a bit of time in the towns and really get a feel for the place. So you're not just talking about numbers, it's trying to you're really getting into the data, getting the feel for it, and that makes the difference when you tell the story about places. Some examples, one example, right, of this sort of inaction, and this is to do with at the local level. So you got to do county development plans, housing strategies, HNDAs, retail strategies, and so on. Really important one that comes up is this local economic and community plan. So that's a plan for local authority for 2023 to 29, we'll say. And you have to set out a whole series of strategies at the community level and the economic level. So that's really important, those two things. It's not just about economic development, it's about community, it's about facilities, about what's in place, it's about services. So how this sort of piece works in the department would have put all this stuff together. There's a clear process to doing this at a local level. The number one part of this is each local authority have to do this very detailed socioeconomic analysis of what's going on in their area. So for us, we would be involved in many of these, and that's where the data comes in at the start to really get a feel as to what's going on in the area. So I'm going to just talk through this kind of process and show you how data very much is so involved in all the different levels of this sort of work. With the LECPs, there's so many different members involved in it, and the engagement and consultation. So you've got all your local authority elected members, your councillors, right? This is their place. They're representing us as citizens. So it's their role to make the right decisions. So they're fully embedded in this. You've got all your local authority officials. You've got some government, state agencies, and so on, regional assemblies, and you've got business groups. So you've got so many people involved in trying to get this plan in place for each local authority. There's a policy piece. You need to put it all together on this at the start. And then what we would have done is developing these socioeconomic statements. So I'll just show a couple of examples of how we would work through that and how you tell the story of a place. So we normally start with sort of demographic stuff. So we're looking at where the local authority is in terms of population change, what's happened in different areas. So when you present something like this, 8.5% for a county, and then you talk about change at the local level, councillors in the room, all of a sudden, they're like, everyone's, looking for their figures to see what's going on, because that's what they're interested in, is at the local level. So we will work through this, tell the story of how places have changed, tell the backstory as to how they've changed over the years. So the difference between this place up here, Cove MD, versus down here, West Cork, two completely different trajectories of growth. So very different things going on in one local authority. And so that really feeds into the policy development stuff and as they work through the plan. That's what's happened in the past. We then talk about the future, where it's likely to go in terms of population projections. So we're growing, of course, and different things. But our huge thing is, what's going to happen with our elderly population. We've increased in Ireland from 16 to 22, 25% growth in population 65 plus. Think about where our health system is now and services and rural isolation. This is going to change dramatically up to 2040. So we're going to be living in a very different country at that point. And people who are working on these plans and policies are still probably going to be doing the same job. So this is going to happen within their work environment. So we're going to see this major change coming down the line. A really important graphic, and this is about the visualization stuff, and this is just one indicator, right? Population 65 plus. And we spent years and years putting these things together, but we know that they work now and they're used so much in so many different local authorities. Keep on coming back to these. So you have your map of what's going on, friends. You've got your key stats up here about you're the second highest in the state, the 17th highest. And I know, Bernie, a lot of your work, it's not about rankings, who's doing best, who's doing not worse, who's doing not so good. In our work with local authorities, that's what we do, is we tell them how they're doing, and we're specific to their place. We say, you're actually doing very well here, you're the second lowest here on that side. And, we've the kind of independence to do that in there, but that's what you want. And telling that story is important. This graphic here, this geographic hierarchy, we call it, right? This is one set of data, but it tells the whole story of the place. And place is the most important thing here, because we're looking at age 65 plus. You can see in the West Cork MD, it's 20%. These other places, it's 12%. So they're little bits of data. If you're from that place, or you're from that town, or you're representing rural or the Gaeltacht, All of these different things are in here that tell the story about an area. And that's really powerful when you put it through, and they just really engage with this stuff. Yeah, lots of different things here. Looking at where jobs are, the strength of economies in some places where it's very low. Other words, we look at, foreign direct investment, how we've gone over the years. You basically build up all this stuff, house prices, how good are you versus the state versus other places and so on. Is it very expensive? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Affordability issues. If you're down here, you're one of the most affordable places in the country to live. So for an economic development department, that's a good thing. Okay, we can attract people to move here because it's actually affordable. So all these things feed in to the work environmental data. All this bit feeds into this SCOT analysis that they need to do, right? And this essentially goes then out to all this public consultation. You tell the story about what's happening, and it's all data, the different phases, getting out, discussing it. The amount of consultations that needs to be done for this plan is absolutely staggering. Like it takes a huge amount of work, an absolutely huge amount of work for the local authorities. What it comes down to, when you have all that stuff, you come up with a vision, you come up with these objectives. So where we're going to go with our objectives. And then you essentially we get back here, you have all these action plans. So you get these action plans of how you're going to go. And a lot of this stuff is all data driven. It works the whole way through. The last bit on the LECP now, so they're all done. It's full circle. It's back now to monitoring and evaluation. And you will see a lot of the stuff, each plan has this thing, how we're going to monitor this, how we're going to use data. And only on Monday, I presented the Regional Development Monitor to all the LECPs across the country. The department are now saying, okay, this is your tool to use for monitoring many of the indicators in your LECP. So, all of this data stuff, it starts up the top here. Know what you're talking about, discuss it, make your plans, have it evidence, and now we're going to monitor it. So you can see that data is very much plugged into this whole policy cycle here in the LECPs. Lots of different tools out there then to show, how things can work, and all these technologies that are out there. There's great examples across the country. So last couple of points here, 5 key takeaways. So data's changed dramatically. Certainly since I've been involved in this stuff, it's completely changed. There's so much great stuff out there. It's been used a lot more within local government. And it's not just kind of as a reference point, it's now been used as a baseline. It's now been used for all sort of work and decision making. It's absolutely the heart of policy and planning. Every single one of these things, it's data driven. For me, the most important change, and this is where the opportunities arise, is how technology has changed and how easy it is to create these absolutely amazing tools. When you look at local authorities across the country, some of them are 10 times the size of others and have 10 times more staff and different expertise and so on. So it's difficult to get a parity with what you can do in places. But at the same time, if you can create good things with technology and data in one place, there's really no reason why you can't do it in other places, because the data is there, the technology is there. So showcasing best practice is so important. So the works of the Irish Planning Institute, all the work that the Office of Planning Regulator do, all that sort of stuff, showing all the good stuff out there and showing the best things is really important. Education is such an important part of this. We do a lot of this with the Regional Development Monitor, and I think challenge there is to get the new graduates and the early career professionals as they start as juniors, interns, executives, senior executives go up the line. If data and these tools, it's not something you'd like to have, it's just something that's there and it's available to you all the time. That's what we need to do, is change it. Right up at the top level, there's the high level briefings and all that, but it's having the time to actually get in, and that is tricky. So it's down within the policy departments where you need people getting involved in all of this. To me, the final thing, data in the country is transformed. There's brilliant stuff out there. It's getting better and better. It's easy to share. The technology is brilliant. It's so good. Now, the most important thing are the ideas. If somebody working in policy knows what's going on, knows what's required, you come up with the idea. That's the most important thing. It's very straightforward to build a tool around that. So there's huge possibility in Ireland. I would say is like an international leader in this space. Maybe it's due to the size of our country. You know, we're not that big. We can produce all this data for the place, but there's, in terms of data visualization, technology, planning stuff, we're absolutely front runners on an international level. So I'll leave it at there, guys, and I'm happy to take questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Justin. That was two absolutely brilliant presentations this morning, wasn't it? Really substantial, and I'm so glad you didn't butcher that like your best man speech. Justin, I'm curious as to know more about that, but we'll maybe get to that at some stage. I had tons of stuff, but I'm conscious we've got half an hour. I mean, I think one of the takeaways for me, and quite shocking in some ways, because I've always thought that the value added of universities is not the data, but it's the interpretation of the data. It's the analytic extraction of meaning from the data. That's where we can add value. But perhaps there's something here, it's a sobering reminder that actually stripping away interpretation, there's no such a thing as a data without a story. All data is in and of itself a story, but the concept of data stories seems to be an extraordinarily powerful thing. It's something academics, we now need to learn how to story our data, and that doesn't take the form of a 200-page report. Then we are going to have to upskill in all sorts of new different ways. And I know we've got an expert in here who might come to in the end on data stories and how we tell stories about data, and put them into the world in meaningful ways. So that idea of narrating data in ways that are beyond the normal academic style of having a 200-page report and having some kind of massive amount of tables and so on, is, I think, a sobering eye-opener for myself. The only one thing I wanted to ask before we go into the audience is, clearly the two of you are doing amazing stuff independently. Is there scope, and perhaps Bernie can answer this in the first, for universities and local data, the LGMA, to collaborate more? Is there plans for that? Is there scope for that? Is there opportunities there? Because you are with 4 people, as you say, it's incredible the work you do with such limited people, but is there tremendous assets across the state to leverage?
Yeah, and look, because I suppose the research unit, as it's currently formulated, and the central data unit then supporting us, is only up and running maybe 3 years, and some of our policy areas, like the homeless data, we only got less than a year ago. So we're in our infancy. So we are at a point now where we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we increase our engagement with the academic side of things? Now, one of the challenges for us is that academics tend to focus on individual policy areas, and you can see where we are across absolutely everything. So it's very difficult for us to engage with absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
So internally, we're even kind of looking at, okay, we need to think about maybe being a bit more strategic about picking 5 or 6 key data areas that we want to work on and engaging specifically then with people, that support us. But look at having Sarah and Emily come into us as well, because Sarah in particular has really kept her connections with TCD. So we're trying to, because I had to kind of take care of in-house first and get people bought in. And now they're bought in. Now we're in a position to start reaching out, and it's why we brought Rob and Carla in from their data source perspective around the planning piece before we started. It's just to say that there are people out there who know as much as us, but from a different perspective, and have the skills to look at it differently to us. Because there's only 1 or 2 of us, so we're very limited in what we can do. So we are at a point now we are looking to try and figure out how to do it, but there is a challenge. Because of the breadth of the policy areas that we work on, and that really is a challenge for us.
And I think what would be useful, and Justin might be able to answer this, is a common reference architecture in the way we collect data, so that we have, you were saying, data speak to each other, and you've now got really good tools to allow data. But universities, I think, if they were producing data or working to produce data to a common reference architecture that was interoperable, and allow data to speak to each other, I think would open up an opportunity for people to collect data from the get-go in ways that can plug in a bit easier. How would you estimate the data ecosystem in Ireland, Justin? You say it's amazing, but do you have to do a formidable amount of work to convert data sets so that they speak to each other?
I guess it depends on what sort of data you're looking at. You know, environmental data is generally very different to the socio-demographic stuff, which is, you know, a lot of the stuff we're interested in places. So we're interested in, you know, geography about whether it's a town or a village or local level. And we like to have the stuff from the top down. So what are they saying at the state level? What's it like down here, to be able to compare and contrast? That's the key thing. Like the CSO, in fairness, they will produce stuff at a certain geographical scale. That comes down from, you know, stuff from Eurostat. So they produce the NUTS 3, the NUTS 2, the county, the local level stuff. They're doing a lot more local electoral area data now, which is really important, and that's really welcome, because at a local level, that's a really good set of data to have to talk with councillors and so on. So it's improving on that side. There's so many different data providers. It kind of flows into data.gov in some ways. There's an awful lot of stuff in there, but just because it's open data and available doesn't necessarily mean it's, you know, it's ready and set up to do the sort of stuff that we do. You're always going to have a little bit of nasty work in the background, cleaning it up, getting time series stuff, getting it to talk the way you want, really. So it depends on the source, but overall, like, the CSO do absolutely brilliant work, and they do support a lot of the other government agencies in how they produce their data. So it's really improving. You know, we've the census every 5 years here. You know, I don't think there's many other countries in the world that have that. So, you know, we're very lucky with the level of information that we have. But at the same time, I was on a talk on Monday, and local authorities were saying, you know, where are we now with the population? We've changed beyond belief in the last 2 or 3 years. So even if you think we have our census every 5 years, the scale that we're moving at in Ireland, it's almost not enough, because it's changed so much.
But it almost seemed to me that planning, I mean, we've been looking at this national level, planning seems to be unbelievably evidence-based. If there's any one sector with evidence-based policy, planning has been driven by evidence-based in a lot of ways. Now, maybe decisions have been taken beyond evidence, as happens, but I found that was the power of local authority data-driven public policy compared to national data-driven public policy. I think there's something very interesting bubbling away at local level. Can I just go out to folks now, because people might want to ask you, if you just introduce yourself, please, that would be great. And I think I'll have to give you the microphone.
Thanks very much. My name is Sophie Carey. I'm from the Policing and Community Safety Authority. And I have a question. Actually, both of those were great presentations, really interesting, and I'm buzzing with ideas. But for Bernie, I know they're building community safety kind of structures across the country, including the local community safety partnerships. Do you see yourself having any role there in new types of data in, I suppose, ill-defined but community safety sphere? Thank you.
Okay, I suppose our governance is critical for us, because there's just thousands of areas we could engage with from a policy perspective. So we need to wait for the CCMA committee, which is the Rural Community and Heritage Committee, to ask us to do that. At the moment, and we probably wouldn't have scope, but Justin definitely has data in the RDM that would support the kind of work that's been done in that area. So like centrally, like we're even gathering completely different type data than Justin, because we're going out to administer systems, like the planning piece going out to the 31 planning systems, saying, look, you all gather it differently, but can we try and bring it together centrally? So ours is a completely different data journey than Justin's, where he's gathering a lot of existing data and trying to pull it together. Whereas we're trying to get the local authorities to say, okay, your local data you're putting in there, can we start working towards getting it more unified so we can pull it together and develop a national picture? So like we're kind of more of a top down
Yeah.
and we're engaging with the officials at a senior level and politicians, whereas a lot of Justin's work is in the chambers and so on. So we're coming in from two different aspects, but but in terms of which policy pieces we respond to, and that is obviously a current policy piece, if it comes through a CCMA committee to us, we will respond to it. So that's really how it's going to happen, if it's going to happen.
Okay. I suppose for Justin, I think local community safety partnerships have to produce local community safety plans.
Yeah.
And that kind of feeds into what you're looking at.
Yeah, so there's lots of our stuff on here would be of use at the county level. The census atlas, of course, you get down to your real local level pieces. But what's been interesting the last couple of years is we've worked with some of the main cities and so hopefully starting to do something with Dublin City now, is to start developing actual new kind of neighbourhood areas. So, you know, when people talk about places like down in Cork, Ballincollig, or places like this, you know, they're not actually existing geographical areas now. So we've done similar stuff with Galway, Waterford, and Cork, and developing these local level communities, in creating these boundaries, and then you fill them with all the different data sets that are required to understand, you know, who lives there, how it's changed. And all that would feed into your sort of work. So all that data is there at the moment to do it. And how we respond to this, well, we kind of just make it up as we go along. And I've been doing it for 20 years, depending on what the kind of need is and request is. And you know, the type of data we get involved in, the policy that we get involved in, really it depends on what's going on in Ireland society at the time. Like, you know, when we started, Rob, with the housing stuff, you know, I remember talking to Brendan Bartley down the corridor in the old building in 2008 or 9 or something, and the housing market was imploding. It was all vacancy everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, the country, how are we going to recover from this? And here we are now. All we're talking about is lack of housing and how we need to build, you know, 60,000 homes a year. So data changes, data needs and priorities change, you know, certainly, you know, you might think they'll never change, but all of a sudden it's completely transformed.
When we started, we don't know it's out, and then
And
notes have disappeared.
exactly, yeah.
I'll come back to that. I actually wanted to just come back to you towards the end, Rob, just to get some thoughts on Gleeson story, methods of them. Anybody else got any questions you want to ask? Yes, please, a couple of years, sorry.
Hi, my name is Emma Whelan. I'm an associate professor in the physics department. And I guess I'm here today because in the last few years, I've started serving on more committees, kind of national and international, around the whole area of women in STEM. And also I'm trying to persuade the government to invest more in basic research and join organisations like CERN and the European Southern Observatory. And I find that I thought your talks were really interesting. And I find, you know, we have a lot to say, but we're not being listened to, or it's very hard to get our message across. So I just wondered if for somebody like me, do you have any tips around how I could improve in the area of this idea of telling stories with your data, or the storytelling? You talked about your best man speech and how you've become so good at going into, you know, so I serve on some government committees and it's just so difficult, you know, so to make that kind of transition or to become better in that area, do you have any tips? Or
Can't advise in physics, definitely not.
Well, just I mean, in general, about, you know, hoping to influence policy around EDI and you know, as I said, trying to persuade them that we need to invest more in basic research.
I guess, you know, I'm in working the kind of the planning area for so long now, you become such an expert on it. And I think having the domain expertise is the key thing to start with. Like, if you understand the policy and if you understand what the need is there, and then it's, you know, trying to develop the key data to support your message. That's the key piece. You know, how you can get that, how you can say, okay, well, you know, how is Ireland going? How are we? We're so far off international standards. You know, if you can show that there's a problem there with your data and your demonstrations, and then have some, you know, there's also possibility, there's opportunities there. It's just trying to build up this compelling story. And I guess for me, you know, going into these chambers, or whether it's you know, in government, in the Dáil chamber, where you go there to discuss all this, it's just, it takes years of actually confidence and knowing, being comfortable going in to know that you're actually, you know more about this than most other people you're talking to, and have the confidence to be able to tell that story. It takes a long time to do it, but I think just being, you know, having that expert knowledge on what you're talking about, it's just kind of a design piece after that. So your story is just, it's engaging from start to finish.
I think it'd be
If that
interesting.
makes any
Yes, I think it'd be interesting to talk more about how we can upskill, like you were saying, to become better at presenting our data for people who are kind of very focused on academia. I think
If I could just say, though, one of the critical things is you have to keep it simple.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Academics, we tend to want to explain the entire thing and come to the punchline. Nobody wants the entire, they just want the punchline. So, and often it's about knowing if there are one or two things you need. And I know personally it's about the more I present it, the more I can distill it and distill it and distill it until I have it. Like I should say with the homeless stuff, like you talk about dozens of versions till you get the point. Okay, well, what are the key points I just need to know here? These are the 2 or 3 things. And then you just say you're doing the right thing about these committee things. You need to understand which committees are influential, which ones are not. Who amongst the various committees are the ones it's getting that right piece of information in front of the right person at the right time. But it absolutely has to be simple. It really, and like they don't care. They assume your methodology is sound. They're going to assume all that. You don't need to tell them that. So, and you see, this is the thing about the data. Like now, data can be as corrupt as anything. Like you can make data say anything, because my background is in finance. So you can make numbers say anything, like literally anything. But you have to have that integrity behind you, and you have to have it distilled down so that it's simple. Because you know yourself, you look at things. There's a million things that need to happen here all at once, but you have to pick the 1 or 2 most important things. Or there could be a small thing, but you know that affects that person. So you have to be very strategic about which pieces of data to use at one time, and you really have to become expert at distilling things down. And it is back to this. We're in the era of graphics. You're talking about strap lines. I mean, that is where we're at, and that is about where we have to move forward.
Yeah, and it's almost what you present, right? Even if you're presenting something to somebody and it's 5 slides, you want them to be able to take that away and be able to use it and explain it to other people. It needs to be that kind of straightforward. But it's tricky. It has to deliver. You know, you're trying to deliver a key message that's going to make some sort of impact on policy or funding, whatever it is. Is trying to get that balance right.
Come back to you, Rob. Thank you very much. We're going to Nicola. That's not okay.
Hi, I'm Nicola Mountford. I'm a lecturer in School of Business here. You're going to kill me because this, I think, is quite a big question. So I'm interested in what you perceive to be the role of the local authority in health policy planning, and given our goal of moving more healthcare into the community and so on. I know that there wasn't a policy committee for health, and but yet we're talking about data sources around aging populations and so on. So yeah, I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, or if there's any plans to kind of move more into that space policy wise.
You've got to walk the talk, simple structure. You've got to present as an answer to that simple strip. I'm conscious of time, so if we could answer quite quickly.
I suppose, look, it's on the periphery of a lot of things. Like to say they'd be like all local authorities have involved in Healthy Ireland, and then even things like emergency response planning and so on. You have to be aware of who in the area is vulnerable and what plans are in place for those. But in terms of direct, like we get funded from the Department of Health for bits and pieces for programs. But it's really down to local response on the local level. But local authorities are limited in terms of only working areas where they're funded to engage with. Now, Sarah beside you has a background in health and has come into the LGMA and so on. So look, and then you have the healthy aging coordinators and so on, working with older people going into try and keep them in their own homes, and that involves giving them advice on who you engage with from a health perspective and so on. So there's a huge amount of community involvement that happens at a local level that does involve elements of the health, but not one big form of policy. So it's on the periphery everywhere. Like absolutely everywhere. It's embedded within, just because the Healthy Ireland age-friendly piece is under the housing. All those members work under housing, so it's there embedded throughout it. So it would take a bit of time to go through them all.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that. So the example I showed at the end about the local economic community plans, in the community section, there'll be 2 or 3 objectives. There'll be something there about, we want whatever X county to be a healthy place to live, take care of our elderly population, our vulnerable people. There'll be objectives in that plan to do something about that, and there'll be actions. So there'll be a list of actions, but the responsibility for delivering that action will probably be the HSE or somebody else. So they're connected in that way. And the local authority will then have to report on the progress on that. So they're tracking the actions of health related stakeholders.
And it's the same with homelessness. The HSE are there involved in homelessness. They all come together. They have all to report together. So there are various policy pieces around where the HSE are an integral part of integrated working. So they're all over the place. You could do a mapping exercise just on that alone.
Yeah, it's everywhere and nowhere. There is quite a lot of online questions. So Sean's going to
just comments and questions online. There's an awful lot of thanks, and people are really interested. Just a comment from Sheila about Healthy Ireland, about how that's been delivered as a Department of Health policy through local authorities. Just to mention that. Ludwig in the School of Business was really asking about the scope for comparisons between local authorities. It seems to be all for interesting comparisons. So is there more can be taken from comparing and contrasting where action has been taken and where it hasn't been taken to implement policies? And also internationally then, you mentioned how we have a lot of data here compared to other countries. Do we get any useful comparisons internationally out of the data, or is it to the extent that that's possible? Then we have other people, somebody mentioned the Pobble deprivation index, using the data and obviously using much of the same data that we're talking about. That deprivation index has obviously been really, really interesting and relevant to the development of policy. There's a particular question about spatial data and at-risk groups, and of whether there's very helpful data available for those. You're not going to get to all of these, but in an answer you might be able to touch on some of them. A couple of questions around data availability and whether there are some limitations. GDPR is mentioned, paywall for data is mentioned, and maybe I'll add one myself. Data that's not there, are there big data gaps that is not even that you're not able to get it? Is that there are just data gaps? And then another person has raised the issue of that for them, once you get the data, how can you really get the policymakers to act on it? I mean, that this person identified there's a big challenge in that. And then I suppose, is it possible, and I'm again just repeating what somebody has asked, to look at how countries have acted on data, and can you compare the extent to which in different countries data is used more to impact on decision making and therefore action? And then finally, and maybe this will be a question when Professor Rob Kitchen comes in at the end, could somebody describe what a data story is so they understand that concept that you've been mentioning a couple of times? So sorry, I'm giving it just a splattering, a splattering of, yeah.
Can I just do with the comparison piece, because like when Justin's going into Cork, he's positioning Cork compared to the others. Nationally, we're just trying to pull the data together to develop a national picture. And not our objective in the CCMA is not a name and shame and go who's highest, who's lowest. It's to look at the data and try and understand why people are positioned in a certain way. And so it's not comparison to try and achieve a ranking. It's an analysis to try and understand why figures are the way they are. And it's really important for us because we're working with local government. We are local government, to say, we're like, if you got a class here and said, okay, we're going to pitch all against each other, you're off to a really bad start. So you're in saying, okay, let's all just understand where we are and why we are. And a good example of that is climate action KPI indicators. And one of the things we were tracking was number of emergency weather planning meetings that were held and a number of plans that were activated. And we were just saying, massive anomalies. Like Kerry are having like 60 meetings a year and activating 40 plans, and Fingal had one.
you know, and we're going, okay, well, what's going on here? And what it is that, well, first of all, Kerry gets way more rain and wind than anybody else, but it was beyond that. And what it was is that a lot of the emergency weather responses in Fingal, because it's a big local authority, is business as usual. So it's not captured through that. So because we were looking at them, like you could take that as a comparison, but it wasn't. What it was revealing was different processes behind it. So there's now an initiative where we have training going on within the Department of Housing, you know, with all the emergency response teams to say, okay, let's standardise how we all, first of all, who's on a team, when it's called, when they're reacting. And so we can actually consistently say, okay, we're monitoring. So the purpose, like comparison there implies pitting people on ranking. Our comparison is to try and understand what's behind the figure, and it's normally to do with processes, but it was an invaluable exercise for us to prompt this change that some of the chief executives have been arguing for, but we're only after 2 or 3 years of reporting saying this is becoming ridiculous now because look at the figures and so on. So that the purpose behind comparison is critical, like really, really critical. So
thank you. Justin.
Yeah, but the first thing addressed in terms of the GDPR and the paywall stuff, everything I've shown there, let's say the Regional Development Monitor, it's completely open. Anybody can use it, download the data. It's a public resource. All data on there is essentially public data. There's some other bits and pieces that comes from different agencies, but there's no GDPR issues with anything on that. Of course, we would work in projects for different clients or groups, so we'll be using you know, internal data in there, which isn't publicly accessible at all. In terms of the data storytelling, what is it? I don't know. Is it just a new kind of fancy term for describing places? But in the sort of work that we do, right? So if we're working on a local authority, I've got 15 minutes to describe what's going on in the local authority, where it's come from, where it's going. And so I build that up through, I guess, a narrative throughout, and I've very clear in my head how to tell the story through different themes that work together in a good order. So it's about telling the story about the population, how that has changed, why the population has changed. Then you get into describing that population. Then you move on to maybe something about the infrastructure, about housing, about economy, about environment. So there's an order to how you tell the story about the place. And that's really important to kind of work through the different pieces, because certain parts of your discussion later on are the results in that are based on what's happened in terms of the population. So you got to piece all of that together, but it's keeping it simple, engaging with graphics. And for me, the most important thing is when you're talking about these things, you need to really focus on place. And if there's people in the room from places, it's about being able to refer to that, to have it as engaging and as personal as possible with people in the room. And it's a skill set that you develop over time, but you know, it's just a new term, you know.
So we're going to ask Rob to clarify in just a second. I'm conscious of time, and so yep.
Not just in relation to data availability. What's really important as well is that just say certain IT systems can only collect what they're legally allowed to collect. Because we had a conversation even with the CSO yesterday about certain data Eurostat are going to look for. And there's a brand new planning system. So all new systems are being developed now with a view to getting the data out, which they weren't previously. But like just say even things like homelessness and how many travellers are within that cohort, we can only ask it if they're looking for traveller specific accommodation unless they volunteer to give it. So there are data gaps, but some of them are things that we cannot address. So that's just really important for people to understand that, and also to understand that as we go forward, new systems everybody's looking at the data now at the start and not developing the system, then figuring out they can't get anything out of it, which has been the case with a lot of our legacy systems because they weren't designed for that. So just I think
yeah, absolutely, and I think there's a lot of post-commercial private data as well that can be that's still available. Rob, can you do this in like 3 minutes? And then I'm going to go back and give you a last chance to round off anything.
Yeah, so the stories, I think the notion, so I'm Rob Kitchen, I run the Data Stories project here, which is an ERC funded 5-year project looking at housing and planning data. And I started AIRO back and hired Justin. So the data stories for me are stories where the narrative is driven by the data. So they're typically the story you tell is full of facts or visualizations, and you're using like the evidence to kind of drive the story. You often see them in dashboards now where you'll have like, you know, you will scroll down the screen and you get like these different visualizations with a little bit of text that interprets it for you, and you kind of tell the story of housing or what's going on in a local area. So it's very much a data-driven narrative. That's what it's been. So you don't just get the graph, or you don't just get the whatever. You get this kind of text that links it across. Your point about how do you get things done? Actually, you never mentioned that you did like the Women in Politics dashboard, and you did all the HEA stuff on, which probably has women in STEM data in it, right? So yeah, Justin's person to talk to if you want data on that, right? He has data on that for certain. For me, the issue, if you want to get action, then the data has to be linked to consequence and opportunity. You have to kind of say, this is the data, and this is the consequence of you not acting on that data. Or this is the opportunity if you do act on that data. If you just present the data and you don't, like, you won't get any action. The other key thing for me is champions. If you don't have a champion working on the other side, like, it's very difficult to get anything done, you know? So for me, it's probably assistant sec up, or it's a politician, you know? Otherwise you're just, you're just talking into the, you know, but even if you've got compelling stuff, there's lots of blockages and barriers in the system, and vested interests and everything else that you're trying to work around. So it's champions and coalitions. Actually, you can build a coalition of several people all trying to say the same thing. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You can have a coalition and it doesn't go anywhere because, you know, you just whatever the blockage in the system is. So I think you have to link the data up to some kind of consequence or action or something, you know. We have mapped out the whole of the planning and housing data terrain. So we now have a database up that lists 350 longitudinal data sets from 90 different organizations. So finding this stuff is really difficult. Like, Justin has a really good mind map of where all this data is. Most people haven't got a clue, right? They'll look at the CSO, they'll look at a couple of other places, and that'll be it. There's bits of data here, there, and everywhere. It's incredibly varied, right? So a lot of it doesn't go below county level. So spatial granularity is really lacking on a lot of data sets. There are tons of holes and gaps. So we've like done whatever 230 odd interviews with experts in this, and we've mined out of them where they think all the gaps are, data that they want but they can't find. We have at least 150 of those in housing and planning alone, right? So we have 300 data, but we've got loads of stuff that they just don't know about, and they don't exist. And they're in every part of the housing and planning system. We have gaps and so on. But Justin is right for in the sense of a lot of Europe will look at Ireland quite enviously at the amount of data that we actually do have. When you talk to an organization like Housing Europe, they'll say we're in the top 5 easiest countries for them to assemble data to go into their Housing Europe reports. People in Ireland definitely don't think that. We all think the data is rubbish, or it's difficult, or there's gaps, or there's a lot of work to do, but it's a lot worse than other countries. And it's partly because of scale and so on, and things have got immeasurably better. Even from when I was writing this grant application to now, things have changed an awful lot in the last 5 years. And it's night and day to back in 2006-07 when we were scrabbling around to get hold of anything other than the census. It was really difficult to get anything. And it's night and day, and it's getting a lot better, but there's still a long, long way to go. And I think Bernie's right. The key to this is linking on to the administrative data sets within local authorities and government. It's not about the CSO going off and doing new surveys and going off and whatever. Everything's been run off of data systems these days, and it's about making sure that we can get the data out of those systems in ways that don't compromise around GDPR. The GDPR is a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it does protect people. On the other hand, there's lots of agencies that use it as an excuse that they can't give you the data. They can give you the data, they just don't want to aggregate and give it to you. So they'll just say, there's GDPR issues. They don't have to give you the raw data. They can aggregate it to a level where you can use it. They don't do that, you know. But there are lots of issues around the data. As Bernie said, like, there's 31 local authorities. They're basically using 7 or 8 different planning IT systems. None of them are standardized. They're all configured differently. Very, very difficult to run reports on them because they're legacy systems that were never designed to give you data. Until that's sorted out, you won't get the good data. But it's in the process of being changed. And it's been in the process of being changed across every single government department, because old legacy data systems are being upgraded, updated, and so on. And the data requirement is now being fed in. So it will definitely get better, but it's a bit of a journey. And our ability to be able to do stuff with it, as Justin said, with the tools, is getting markedly increased. You know, so the threshold is going lower and lower.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm going to expedite matters because I'm very conscious of you taking your time. To thank, and I will give a chance to have one very brief thing before passing to Seán to round off. To thank everyone for coming today. With 44 people, 20 in the room, 44 online. Umpteen questions beyond what we could cope with. And one of those seminars where clearly we didn't exhaust the conversation to the point it petered out. But it's like I just feel as if we're opening doors that we haven't even begun to explore. So we've tapped on something that's clearly ripe for further seminars and conversation. So I'd like to thank to Bernie, to Justin for absolutely stellar, hard fought for insights through many direct and difficult, challenging conundrums and problems you've had to work through. Clearly, you've culled your conclusions from a lot of experience, and that's come across in the presentations. One quick word each, and then I want to pass to Seán. I know Seán has got some signposting to do for a couple of seminars to come, but you want to just say any final capstone, very brief comment?
Yeah, I think that we're just at the start of the data journey. And I think the pandemic shifted things quite dramatically, where people wanted data instantly and the general public are more data literate than they ever were before. And new systems are coming down. Our capacity to extract data out of new systems will improve. I'd say this time 10 years, it'll be unrecognizable, absolutely unrecognizable. But it is critical that we get more academics into public service who understand data and can interpret data, because that expertise, because data still needs to be interpreted. And it's really important we get people who understand the policy areas intricately to be the ones to understand the data. So academics need to be not scared of data. It needs to become a basic skill of all academics going forward, and we need to get more academics into the public service.
Yeah. Yeah, just a final piece actually follows up on what Rob said there about the importance of having a champion behind something. I think the work that was done on the COVID hub and the crisis situation at the time, and how in God's name do we get data on this? Like, a group was assembled, the data was kind of pulled together, the technology was there, but it was essentially the idea was there, we need this, we need to build this thing. And we had champions in the form of from central government. The government was taking care of the confidentiality, and it just actioned and it happened. And I think that was such an important point in Ireland and in developing these tools all around the world, that you can actually build these things quite quickly. It is absolutely possible to do it. And I guess, one last message that I would have for, those working in the planning sectors, if you have an idea for, you need to produce a tool to do something, the chances are you absolutely are able to do it with the data that's there now. The technology is there. All you need is the idea and somebody to actually to drive it and put the things in place to get this thing done. We're at a point now where we can start developing really great stuff.
We need a Sherman.
A Sherman, yeah. Well, he's on my phone there, so I can.
Alan House Black, thank you so much for videoing it. Seán, I'm going to leave you now around as well.
Yeah, well, thanks to Anne and thanks to Orla as well in the organisation. Look, that's been really interesting. I thought we're really lucky to have innovators such as the two of you in your roles. And obviously you're working with lots of people in these communities of engagement and practice and building up people who are interested in advancing it. And your point at the end, Bernie, I think was very well made. We need lots of connections so that we have academics working with government in its different guises to interpret the data. And just to mention in that regard that we've actually in this seminar series included in it quite a few people who've spent some time in working for government under various schemes. And at the moment, Research Ireland have just advertised their new public sector fellowship scheme, where there's 40 or 50 places for academics to be seconded in to work with government. So people might want to look at that. Look, this has been a really engaging seminar, and we have a seminar series on track. Mark mentioned the numbers that are here today. We're really pleased with those numbers, and people can look at it afterwards as well. And it's really helpful the way we have it on video. We have a really interesting session with the Government Science Advisor, Professor Aoife McGlythe, here on Wednesday, the 18th of February. And I think it was Justin mentioned politicians and the role of politicians, and I think that you mentioned it as well, Rob. And in fact, all three of you have mentioned it in different ways, but we've a session, a sort of a political evidence for policy session on Thursday, the 26th of March here, which will include Dr. Claire Hickey from the Oireachtas Commission, but also Dennis Naughton, who's now a consultant, but he's a former minister and TD. So that'll be a very interesting one. And then on the 21st of May, we've one that's focusing on health policy and the evidence synthesis that's happened there. So we have a lot of interesting engagements coming, and we're thrilled with the engagement today, and we're really appreciative for the pair of you for the preparation you put in and for your engagement with us today. Thanks,